So I think I'm gonna get started. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for joining us. I think we'll probably have some folks trickling in. Um, my name is Ria Cohn, and I'm the Director of Conservation here at the Swanner Preserve and Eco Center, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm really excited for our speaker and our topic this evening. Kind of before we get into that, our mission here at Swanner is to preserve, educate, and nurture both the land and our community. And tonight's talk is part of Swanner's Walks, Talks, and Workshops program, a series designed to help everyone engage in nature and the world around us. An important part of engaging with nature here on the preserve is recognizing that the Swanner Preserve and Eco Center resides on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Northwestern Band of Shoshone and the Ute Indian tribe. And in offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm an Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experience. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started tonight. You will see we're grateful to have Sherilyn here tonight providing ASL interpretation. Sherilyn's pinned to the screen. You should have some toggle abilities with your view at the bottom of your Zoom bar. This event is also being recorded, and we will be sending a recording in a follow-up email to everyone that registered. So if you have to leave early and you're not able to finish or you arrive late, you'll be able to check out that recording later. And I also want to thank Summit County Rap Tax for helping support Swanner's Walks, Talks, and Workshop series. After this webinar is concluded, you'll also receive a survey in your email, your follow-up email, and we ask that you take time to fill this out. It helps us learn what you want to hear about, what kind of programming our community wants to see, and how we can better serve you. Pikas have been a crowd favorite in the past, so and a community idea. So we're excited to bring this to you. We will have a Q&A after the event that I'll help facilitate, so you can hold on to your questions. You can put them in the webinar chat, which has a couple of things in there already. You can put them in the Q&A, which is also at the bottom bar, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. At the end of the presentation, you can also raise your hand if you want to ask your question on your microphone, but otherwise your camera is off, your microphone is off, so feel free to sit back and relax. A couple of just upcoming things that I want to talk about. It's April 1st, April Fool's Day, but it's also the first day of Earth Month, which is a busy month at Swanner and all over the place. We have a ton of events coming up, so I just recommend you take a look at our calendar. We have a free day for our Amazing Butterflies exhibit on April 13th. We have a Lunch and Learn webinar with Wasatch Wildlife Conservation Center on April 16th. The City Nature Challenge is coming up. We have a film screening with Park City Film Series. And then kind of to wrap up our Earth Month, we'll have our Grand Junction trash cleanup May 3rd. So in just about a month, and there's lots of trash poking up already. So I'm really excited about our topic tonight, pikas. So cute, and I think a lot of people's favorite animal in Utah. These cute high alpine mammals may not be found on the Swanner Preserve, but they're found close to home and in the high alpine areas of Utah. So we're really grateful for our speaker tonight, Dr. Johanna Pika Jo Varner. Dr. Varner is a pika biologist from Grand Junction, Colorado. During the school year, she teaches at Colorado Mesa University, but during the summer, she can be found in the mountains looking for small rabbit relatives called pikas, placing temperature sensors in their habitats and collecting scat samples to analyze for stress. Before she was a pika biologist, Dr. Varner was a biomedical engineer, a baker, and a blueberry farmer. She also dabbles in homebrewing. She likes studying pikas the best because they're adorable and live in beautiful places. So thank you so much, Dr. Varner, for being here. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thanks so much to everybody for organizing this and for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and I want to share with you a little bit about the research that I'm doing. And I'm in Grand Junction, Colorado, which is just across the border from Utah. But I actually grew up in Utah in Salt Lake City. I went to grad school in Salt Lake City, and my research is actually in the Sal Mountains, which are actually in Utah. So I still consider myself very closely connected to Utah. I want to share with you guys a little bit about myself, just because I think this is a really important element of how and why I got into this work. So as I mentioned before, I actually grew up in the mountains of Salt Lake City. At the time, I liked to be outside and I liked animals. And so every summer, my parents actually would put me in science camps that are a lot like the ones that are offered by the Swanner Preserve. And I think that it's important just to note like how important these early experiences were in helping me to develop an identity as a scientist. In high school, I worked really hard and I had great ski style in the 90s, and especially in math and science. And I was really fortunate to be admitted to attend MIT for college, where I studied molecular biology and biomedical engineering. I actually ended up staying an extra year to do a master's in engineering. And in my research, I developed these tiny chips where we could very precisely grow neurons. So the goal here was trying to develop a better cure and for diseases like ALS, where certain types of brain cells die off. And this was really important work, but it manifested itself by me spending a lot of time in a cold, dark room by myself. And so I really wasn't that keen to continue down this path, and I kind of needed a break. And so when I finished school, I ended up taking some time off. I moved back home to Salt Lake City, and I actually worked at Great Harvest at Ninth and Ninth for about a year, and saved some money to travel. And I ended up going to New Zealand to work on organic farms. And when I was there, I really had my eyes open to this sort of whole understanding of the world, looking at interactions between organisms and their environment, which it turns out, of course, most people know as the field of ecology. But I really hadn't had any idea about this as sort of a discipline that people study. Working on organic farms, I also became a lot more familiar with trying to understand kind of human effects on nature, and especially some of the effects of climate change. So when I got back from New Zealand, I was back at the bakery and living at my parents' house. And I had discovered pikas, which are, of course, small mammals related to rabbits that live in the mountains near my home. And I knew that they were being affected by climate change. I had learned about them in a nature show, but I then actually read this Salt Lake Tribune article from 2009, in which they interviewed Denise Deering, who was a faculty member in biology at University of Utah. And so I literally sent her an email out of the blue. Dear Dr. Deering, my name's Joe. I really like pikas, and was trying to ask how to get involved. The timing actually worked out very serendipitously for that, she needed a technician to work in her lab for a year studying hantavirus. And then sort of during that time, we discovered that we had a really great working relationship. And I transitioned to doing graduate school in her lab to study pikas. I felt like studying pikas was both a really great way to both help a really cool species, and learn about more local effects of climate change in the Wasatch Mountains, but also a way to offer people in my community a chance to observe these local effects of this global issue. Now, of course, we're all aware of the many ways that our world is changing around us. And while I won't spend any much time talking about how this affects us humans, I think it's also important to note that plants and animals are also responding to these changes in temperature, precipitation, and ice features. So, of course, you are here to hear about pikas. So let me give you a little roadmap for my talk. I'm going to start out by giving you guys just sort of a brief introduction to the natural history of this really cool species. And then I'm going to share with you a little bit about my research looking at pika stress in a unique habitat, which is the Sal Mountains of southern Utah. And then I'm going to wrap up by sharing a little bit more about how you can help contribute to pika science if you are inspired to do so. All right, so American pikas are small mammals in the lagomorph order. And what that means, lagomorph, is that they are related to rabbits and hares. They're about the size and shape of a russet potato. So they are, yeah, about the size of like a baked potato. And also recently, in a very highly scientific survey, I'm sure that the methods were watertight. They were also voted the cutest mammal. So this is now a fact proven by science. Interestingly, pikas are also the only lagomorph to call. And I want to show you a video of their call, but I have to tell you, before you guys got on here, we were having some problems with the sound. So in order to hear this, you may have to turn your speakers all the way up. So turn up your volume on your speakers, and then I'm going to play a call for you, and I'm going to try not to blast you with my voice. So here is a picture of a video of a pika calling. Okay, I hope that you guys were able to hear that because it's a really funny piece of the internet, and it's actually a pika singing to Freddie Mercury, which I can't actually take any credit for. It's this beautiful piece of the internet, but I do actually want to play for you how real pikas call. So if you turned your volume back up or back down, turn it back up for just a second. Okay, that's the end of the audio that I have to share. So you can go ahead and turn your volume back to a comfortable level. Hopefully you were able to hear those pika calls because they are really, really, really cute. If you weren't, I'll try to impersonate one. Fun fact, it helps if you're making a fake pika call to plug your nose. They actually have different dialects across their range. So that is a video of a pika calling from the Columbia River Gorge, where I did most of my PhD research, but they'll sound a little bit different in different parts of their range. All right, so pikas have a restricted distribution, and you can see that in this yellow shading on this picture of the United States. These are the places where we find pikas across their range, and this distribution is thought to be limited by a sensitivity to high temperatures and a limited ability to disperse between patches of habitat. And so the animals that we find, they typically live in high elevation rock slides and boulder fields that collectively we call talus. And interestingly, unlike most alpine mammals that live in these really high elevation habitats, pikas actually are not able to hibernate and during the winter. And during the winter, of course, there's not a lot of food available when most of their habitat is under snow. And so they do a very unusual strategy for surviving the winter, which is that they build these very large winter food caches. So most animals will actually spend much of their summer amassing a food cache that will sustain them through the winter. A single pika can actually collect up to about 28 kilograms or about 65 pounds of food. And building these caches means a tremendous amount of summer activity. So again, pikas are only about 100 grams or about the size of a potato. So for context, if you were to scale this into human terms, this would be like us amassing something like 20,000 pounds of food, not even counting all of the packaging that we put our food in, making over 5,000 trips to the grocery store, and on each of those trips carrying home the equivalent of about 4 heads of lettuce in your mouth. So the next time that you're at the grocery store, I encourage you to spend a little bit of time in the produce section. Check out the heads of lettuce, check out the potatoes, and I think this will give you a really good sense of how much work these animals put in to surviving the winter each year. Now, of course, you probably may have heard that pikas are declining in parts of their range as a result of climate change. And recently, there are many populations of pikas that have been lost in the Great Basin in particular. This is a map that shows you the results of resurveys of locations that have historical records of pikas. This just means that they're areas where we know pikas used to be about 100 years ago. The orange dots on this map represent about 40% of the locations, and these are the places that have gone locally extinct. So we don't find pikas there anymore. And what we found is that these extinct sites tended to have both a warmer summer and a reduced snowpack during the winter. And this research has really sort of developed supported the development of some leading hypotheses about how climate change might affect pikas. Essentially, if the temperatures get too high, the pikas will be unable to forage during their warm summers, and so they may not get enough food. They typically won't just like run around and get too hot and just keel over from heat stress. Instead, what they'll do is they'll restrict their activity and they'll hang out below the rocks where they live instead of overheating. But if they're not able to forage, they're not able to build those big hay piles, and then they could potentially have a problem surviving the winter. Now, this is actually compounded by the fact that the winter snowpack actually acts as a layer of insulation against those harsh winter temperatures. So if you think about this, if you are going out in Park City or you're skiing in the Wasatch or something in the winter, temperatures are very, very frequently less than 32 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, right, at freezing. But if you're a pika and you're living below 5 to 7 feet of snow, the temperatures stay much warmer, really close to 32 degrees. And so with less snowpack, ironically, the pikas may actually be exposed to colder temperatures during the winter. So a number of studies have predicted how these factors might affect pikas in the future. And essentially the way that these studies work, they're called a species distribution model. They basically start with a map of the current distribution of the species, and then they figure out what the temperature and snowpacks are that this species tends to need. It produces a map like this one that you can see of the current distribution of suitable habitat. And then essentially what they do is they dial up the temperature and say what of those areas will still have those conditions under a 4 degrees Celsius warming scenario, which is the most likely outcome that's predicted by the IPCC for 2100. But this isn't necessarily what we're seeing out there. And actually, so far, pikas are not just marching off the top of the mountain unilaterally. In fact, we're seeing a lot of populations that see dramatic declines, but a lot of other populations that really seem pretty stable. And they seem to be living in areas that may even seem to be unsuitable for them based on what we know about their sensitivity to temperature and precipitation. So basically what we need here is, better models to figure this out, to be able to help predict population declines before they occur. And this, of course, is kind of a useful goal of conservation biology. So one of the things that I'm going to argue today is actually that trying to understand stress could be a really good way to achieve this goal of getting a better handle on vulnerable populations before these declines occur. Now, when we think about stress is really beneficial in the short term, think kind of fight or flight response, but over the long term, prolonged exposure to stress hormones can decrease reproductive output and immune function, which can lead to reduced individual survival. Stress can also be measured non-invasively through scat collection, which makes it a really great indicator of overall health and condition. And so what this means is that essentially we could understand what habitat features most affect stress at the individual level. We might be able to identify conservation and management strategies that could be most effective in decreasing stress in individuals and thereby increasing persistence at the population levels. And so this has been one of my major goals of my research on pikas. So that leads into the next part of the presentation, where I'm going to tell you a little bit about my current research here at Colorado Mesa University, but like I said, in southern Utah, trying to understand how stress is related to habitat features. We've been focused on pikas living in the Sal Mountains, and these are just across the border in Utah from where I am in Colorado. These are the mountains that you can see from I-70 when you drive through I-70 across most of basically from the San Rafael Swell up until the Colorado border. They're also the mountains that if you've ever been to Arches National Park and you see the mountains kind of behind Delicate Arch, these are the La Salle Mountains that you see there. They're really of particular interest, though, for pikas for a few reasons. First of all, we have some reason to believe that pikas in this mountain range may be more vulnerable. They're very far south in terms of their distribution, and they're super, super isolated. And these isolated mountain ranges are the ones where we've seen the most pronounced declines in the past. In addition, we actually don't really know what has been happening here because nobody has really systematically studied pikas in the La Salle Mountains in the past. And so given the lack of knowledge and the potential vulnerability of this population of pikas, our purpose was to understand and to test hypotheses relating stress hormones in individuals to their habitat quality and to climate in this population. So just as a note, a lot of the data that I'm going to show you today actually has been analyzed and prepared by one of my students. This is Carly Wetherill. She's a senior right now. She'll be graduating in a few months, and she's actually preparing this information for publication, which we're really hoping that we have a draft, it's with our co-authors, and she will be submitting this paper as the primary author in the next few weeks. A couple of other students, Troy Muzzio and Holly Nelson, also took the leads on this project in 2021 and 2022, and they are co-authors on this study. So I want to acknowledge that students have been really central to both gathering the data and analyzing the data. Let me show you where the study took place. So this spot that you see here is where I'm speaking to you from right now in Grand Junction. You presumably are up here somewhere on the Wasatch Front in Utah. And the Sal Mountains you can see here in southeast corner of Utah. This is what it looks like on a Google Maps image. So you can see that basically there's a mountain range surrounded by about 40 miles of desert, red rock desert in all directions. And when we zoom into our study site and this cirque, you can see that this is a pretty high alpine kind of habitat. So starting in August 2018, we have been trapping and marking pikas at this site. And essentially what we do is we catch them in these cages, and then we place these colored ear tags so that we can identify individuals. And that way we can also look to determine survival year after year. Each time that the pika, basically they get trapped, handled, we put in the colored ear tags and we release them at the point of capture. It's kind of like a little alien abduction where they get sort of put back exactly where they were with some tags. And then we also during that time collect fresh scat. When we release them, we also place a temperature sensor in the rocks near each marked individual's hay pile. And these help us to record the temperatures that each animal is actually experiencing in their territory every 2 hours. So we end up with a very, very fine scale picture of the individual level microclimate that each pika experiences. We also estimate the vegetation cover in their territory. And so you can see in this picture that we center their territory on their hay pile. We estimate their territory is about a 15-meter radius around the hay pile. And when we estimate the vegetation cover, we also include the relative cover of grasses versus wildflowers. And the idea here is that if pikas don't readily have a lot of food available to them within that 15-meter radius, they may have to run further to get it, and it could be impacting their stress. Now, stress hormones are metabolized when they're released by the animal's stress axis and their adrenal glands. They are metabolized by the liver and then excreted into the gut. And then these metabolites actually show up in the scat. And we can measure them non-invasively with an assay where the samples actually change color in proportion to how much stress hormone is in the scat. I'm happy to talk about this with anyone who's interested in the physiology or how we do this. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to sort of move on to some of our hypotheses. And we use some of the data from the temperature sensors as well as our vegetation surveys to look at our hypothesized predictors of pika stress. Now, each of these metrics came from the literature and have been predictive of population declines in other studies. And so when we think about how the climate might affect pikas, we could think about this as potentially affecting them through high temperatures, cold temperatures, or snow cover. Now, snow cover is also important for a lot of other reasons because in addition to insulating against extreme cold, which I told you about, it also affects vegetation quality and quantity as a major source of water in this habitat for the year. And then, as I mentioned, we also look at the total vegetation cover and the vegetation composition of grasses versus wildflowers. So these are some of the climate metrics that were measured actually at the same place, at the same site each year, so that we can actually compare climates across years. And what I'm showing you here is the overall at the population level average August temperature, number of days that were less than -5 degrees Celsius, so the number of very cold, acute cold days, and the number of days of snowpack. And what we can see here is that we actually captured a lot of significant climate variation among the 6 different years of this study so far. And across all of these, what we can see here is that 2019 was by far the coolest and the wettest year, and 2020 was by far the hottest and the driest year. Also note that 2019 had the most snowpack and those fewer days of extreme cold, whereas 2020 had the least snowpack and had the most days of those extreme cold. That's because when you're missing that snow cover, you get exposed to those really cold temperatures. And then the rest of the years were basically intermediate in all of the different metrics. Now, when we look at how these climate metrics at the population level affect pikas stress, what we can see is that there's definitely a strong signature of climate. So in each of these two graphs, what you're looking at on the x-axis is the climate predictor. On the top graph, this is the average temperature in August that I showed you on the previous table. On the on the bottom graph, the x-axis is going to be the number of days of snowpack. And in both cases, the y-axis is the stress hormone concentration. And note that this is a log scale, which just means that we're sort of compressing that variation and that we're actually seeing really, really big differences in stress between these years. What we can see when we look at this at a population level here is that in both cases, 2019, again, the coolest and the wettest year, 2020 was the hottest and the driest year, and that we see a really strong signature where as August temperature goes up, so does stress hormone averaged at the population level. And the same thing for number of days of snowpack. As number of days of snowpack goes up, we see reduced pikas stress. Now, this is at a population level. And what we were really interested in was kind of going deeper into unpacking this individual variation. And so I want to just show you a couple of things that we found to be very, very important in predicting pikas stress. This is a little bit of a busy graph, but I'm going to walk you through it. Each point on this graph represents one pika in 1 year. The x-axis on this graph now is the graminoid cover. So these are the grasses, sedges, and rushes in that pika's territory. And on the y-axis, we have that stress hormone concentration, again, on the log scale. And the points are colored by year. Now, it may be a little bit kind of hard to see here, but what we can see actually when we look at this, the statistical analyses show us that there's definitely a strong pattern where as the graminoid cover increases, pikas stress is decreasing. And we see this across different years. So now I've overlaid the lines that show you the relationship for each of these different years. However, it turns out that we can also actually order these lines by those temperature metrics. So now what I've done here is change the color of the line. The color of line still represents the year. So the yellow is 2019, the green up here is 2020. But when we look at these lines, we can also see that they're basically arranged by the average August temperature in that year. So the stress on average is highest in 2020, this light blue line, and it's lowest in 2019, the coolest year of our study. And gets hotter. So we have higher stress in these hotter years, but across all of the years, we see that stress in pikas decreases with that graminoid or grass cover within the territory. It turns out that we also see this pattern when we look at that important metric of snowpack. So again, you're looking at kind of the same graph here. On the x-axis, we have graminoid cover in the territory. The y-axis is stress hormone concentration. Each of these spots is a pika in 1 year. And across all of the years, we can see that we still have this decreasing stress as a result of grass cover in the territory, but that stress is also definitely dependent on the days of snowpack in that year. So 2019 here, our highest level of snowpack definitely had the highest or the lowest level of stress. And in 2020, our year with the least amount of snowpack, we see the highest level of stress. But again, still a downward trend between stress and graminoid cover. One thing I also want to point out here is that you'll see that there are fewer animals on this plot, and that is just because this, in order to look at how snowpack affects stress, the animal has to survive through the winter. So we're calculating snowpack by that temperature sensor placed in their territory, and then we're looking at stress in the following year. And in order to have your stress measured in the following year, you still have to be alive. So that is why we have a fewer animals. But the important thing here is that even when we subset this analysis down to a smaller number of animals, we're still seeing the same patterns, which tells us that this graminoid cover or grass cover is really, really important for determining the stress of pikas at this particular study site. Now, in terms of why pika stress might be so tightly affected to graminoids, what we think is happening here is that the common graminoid species, so the grasses, sedges, and rushes in our study area, tend to be most prevalent in more moist alpine meadows. And so even though grasses tend not to be as nutritious of a food source as wildflowers or forbs in general, they may indicate moister habitats. And we think that what might be happening here is that this really high moisture food may be really important for pikas to be able to tolerate heat stress in the summer. Another takeaway that I hope you kind of can see from this study is that this project has really highlighted the importance of this interannual variability, so yearly climate variability. We can see that really depicted very clearly in these pictures. These were pictures taken at the same site at approximately the same place, but in different years. And again, that year 2019, we had a lot of snowpack and it lasted late into the summer. 2020, we had almost zero snowpack left in the cirque. And I was really interested in what was going to happen in 2023 because you guys may remember in 2023, across the whole state of Utah had record snowpack, like just so much snow. And if you live in Park City or Salt Lake City and you remember shoveling snow through the winter of 2023, I'm sure that you are sitting there going like, yes, that happened to me too. However, 2023 also had a really hot summer. And so in the La Salles, it actually all melted and there were very small patches of snow left by the time that we got to August. So kind of as a takeaway from this study, what we can see is that these highly variable systems really, really benefit from this kind of long-term study. And in our work, where we really have only been working since 2018, we're seeing that winter snowpack and average summer temperature, as well as vegetation in the territory are all very important predictors of pika stress. But in order to test our hypotheses about sort of how this happens at an individual level effectively, we really need to have several different years of annual variability in order to come to better conclusions. I want to point out this is a pika that I trapped in 2018 as an adult. Her tags were white, yellow, white, red. So she went by the acronym WYWR. And like I said, we trapped her as an adult in 2018, and she actually was there until 2024. And so her lifespan, I was really, really bummed. She wasn't there. No, wait, she was there until 2023. And so I was really bummed. Last summer, was the first summer that she wasn't there. And you can think about like the kind of annual variability that this one individual has lived through. This kind of long-term data we hope will help us to be more effective at implementing conservation efforts to protect pikas like WYWR and other alpine species and help ensure that more animals are able to live a long life like this animal. I also want to point out that some of these results may end up having very important management implications. And so because we saw these grasses and graminoids being such an important predictor of pika stress, these graminoids may also be, their availability might be affected by grazers. And in parts of the La Salles, there actually is grazing all the way up to above the tree line and up against some of the rock slides and boulder fields where our study takes place. And so if it turns out that having a lot of graminoids is really important for managing the population health of pikas, this may be one lever that is like within our control, whereas sort of stopping climate change would obviously really help pikas. It's a little bit more of a complicated issue. The other thing that these results may point towards is the potential for interactions between pikas and other grazing species. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my collaborator, Mallory Sandoval-Lambert. She's actually a graduate student at Utah State University, and she is working in the Sal Mountains to try to unpack potential interactions between pikas and in the introduced mountain goat herd that has been there for about 10 years. They were introduced by Utah Division of Wildlife Resources in 2014, and they now share habitat with the native pikas. And so Mallory has set up a study that has these series of cages that actually exclude one or both species in order to be able to kind of quantify how much each species is eating when it comes to these important grasses. And hopefully this will help us to better understand potentially how to manage the habitat for both pikas and mountain goats so that they can share this habitat happily together. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, like being a pika researcher sounds like fun, I can tell you it is fun. And I want to switch gears here and just share with you a little bit about how you can get involved in this kind of research if you're interested. So a big part of my research in pikas has also been trying to invite volunteers to participate in science. You may have heard of these projects referred to as community science or citizen science programs. Participatory science is kind of another umbrella term for this sort of program. And I've helped to start and run several of these different programs because it turns out that pikas are really awesome for volunteer monitoring for a couple of reasons. They're active during the day, they're easily to identify and to observe, and in addition, they don't really appear to be affected by human observers. So if they're present, you're basically very likely to detect them. Lastly, pikas also live in beautiful mountain areas in the Western US in a really well-defined habitat that's easy to find. And of course, actually, most importantly, they're adorable. And as I said, considered to be the cutest mammal by many very scientific studies. As a result of all of these factors, there are many groups that are either actively or in the past have engaged volunteers in collecting pika status data. There were at least 11 groups across the Intermountain West that have collected data in the past, and a few state agencies are starting to collect data now. In Utah, this includes the Uintas Pika Watch, which is a program that I actually helped to start with the Salt Lake Center for Science Education, SLCSE. And I had a couple of really amazing teachers there that for a long time brought the entire 7th grade class at SLCSE up to both Secret Lake at Alta and to 3 different sites along the Mirror Lake Highway in the Uintas. And they have been collecting data there since, I think, 2009. So a really nice long-term data set, but only at a smaller number of sites. The points that you're looking at in this map, it represent points that were generated by volunteer programs and were used in a range-wide analysis of how the species responds to climate in different parts of its range. That was published in 2019 in Nature Climate Change. However, in addition to reflecting the distribution of pikas, this map probably also reflects the abundance of volunteers who tend to be relatively well-educated people with extra time on their hands from either the Colorado Front Range, mountain towns like Jackson and Bozeman, or cities like Portland and the Bay Area. And what we see here is that this is actually literally inversely correlated with the areas that we've seen the greatest declines in pika population or the scientific need, which are mostly kind of more remote, more rural areas. And so I think that this highlights the need for kind of a more targeted approach. And one tool that we hope will really expand the range of people and places that volunteer scientists can collect data on pikas is a new app. It's called Pika Patrol, and it's an app that we released in 2023. It was developed through the Colorado Pika Project, but it invites anyone, anywhere with a mobile device to upload photos and audio, in addition to some data about pikas that you might observe. So the app is available for free on all platforms. I really encourage you to check it out if this is of interest to you. This past year, we actually released an update where it is available in Spanish language as well to sort of broaden its accessibility. And you can either scan the QR code or just Google Pika Patrol, and it will take you to the landing page, which has links to download the app for both Apple and Android platforms. So in the field seasons of 2023 and 2024, the app has been used widely. We've had over 2,600 downloads and nearly 700 observations. Most of these observations you can see come from the Colorado Pika Project and Cascades Pika Watch, which are two projects that I help to run. And so we've sort of pushed the app to our volunteers. But you can see here that there's definitely a big open niche for Pika Patrol users from Utah. So I would love it if you download the app, go hiking during the summer up around in the mountains above Park City, check it out and let us know where you see and hear pikas. We're also excited this year to welcome new project, including folks from the Montana Pika Project, the Nevada Pika Atlas, and San Juan Pika Net. And I'm still hopeful that somebody wants to help start and run a project like this in Utah. If that's you, let's talk. Thank you again for this invitation to talk. Science is a team sport, and there are a lot of people who have contributed to the work that I shared with you today. I want to reiterate that these 6 students pictured across the bottom really did a lot of work in helping to collect and analyze the data that I've shown you today, but there are a lot of other people who have contributed ideas or funding in support of this work. And so I think that I've left plenty of time for questions, and I'm totally happy to answer questions now for as long as we have.
Ria, I think you're muted.
Oh, I am muted. Thank you, Hunter. I forgot to introduce Hunter earlier, our visitor experience and exhibits director here at Swanner. You might have seen her typing in the background. Thank you so much, Dr. Varner. That was amazing. Pikas are definitely the cutest animal, scientifically proven. And I think a lot of our attendees would agree with that. So like I said earlier, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A or the chat. If you want to ask your question, you can raise your hand and then we can unmute you if you want to ask your question directly to Dr. Varner. But I think I see a couple coming in here. So maybe we'll start with this question from, I think probably Melissa and Emma. Do pikas live in groups? And if so, how many are in a group?
Yeah, so I think that the technical term for a group of pikas is a colony. I'm not totally sure about that, but we usually just use the word population. They're not a group of animals that have like a fancy, awesome, like Congress or murder name for the plural. But they do tend to live in groups. They are individually territorial. So each animal has a territory that is about 15-meter radius circle around their hay pile. And that's the territory that they defend and kick other animals out of. But they live together in rock slides, and the size of the group depends on the size of the rock habitat. So big rock slides that have a lot of room for a lot of territories will oftentimes have a lot of pikas, and really small rock slides that really only have room for 1 or 2 will really only have 1 or 2.
Awesome, thank you. Another question from Melissa and Emma. Emma's a 5th grade student in Idaho, is interested in conservation. Is Emma eligible to participate in some of the volunteer efforts that you've described?
Yes, absolutely. We would love, Emma, to have you contribute data through the app. You may have to get your parents to download the app. I don't know if it's like has like an age restriction, but I think that you should be able to download it and then you can contribute data. So as long as you're able to download the app, it's called Pika Patrol. Idaho is a really interesting place for pikas because you guys actually have a lot of really unusual habitats. So if you've ever been to Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho, there are actually pikas that live in the lava flows. And that's a really cool habitat because it's much lower in elevation and the surface temperatures are really, really hot for the species. And so if you see and hear pikas in places like that, that's the kind of place that we would really, really love to hear more about. So I totally encourage you to go check it out, especially if you have low elevation rock slides or lava flows that you are able to access. And the biggest thing about those kind of unusual habitats is getting there early in the morning. So like right around dawn, which I know like maybe you don't want to get up quite that early, but as early as you can possibly get, that's the best time to see and hear pikas in those unusual habitats.
Well, that is so interesting. I would never have thought they're at Craters of the Moon. That's
Yeah,
so cool. I'll definitely look
really,
for
really
pikas
cool.
next time I'm there. Uh, our next question from Layla said, thank you. That was fascinating. Do pika change where they store their food from year to year, or do they keep it consistent?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most animals actually stay consistent, and they actually will build this year's hay pile on top of the leftovers from last year. And so they actually, you'll see big piles of green vegetation on top of like old dead brown vegetation. So they usually build it under the same rock even. Sometimes individuals will move territories. It's pretty rare though. Usually once they establish a territory and build a hay pile for the first time, that's where they'll stay. And if somebody new takes over the territory, they oftentimes will actually build the hay pile in the same place that the old owner used to as well. They do have kind of different personalities though. Like some animals will build one big hay pile, and then some animals will build little tiny hay piles, like sort of distributed across their territory. I don't really know why that is. My best guess is that like in some territories where there's like a really big rock with a lot of space, they'll kind of centralize the hay pile. But even sometimes when they have a rock like that, they'll build separate little hay piles all over the place. So I think it might just be kind of a personality thing. I don't know.
Everybody's got their thing. That's so
Yeah,
interesting. That was a great question too.
yeah,
If folks have other questions, I also put the Pika Patrol app, the link to the website in the chat, and then we'll also send out a couple of links that have been mentioned through the webinar in the email. So if you didn't get a chance to write those down, or those will be coming your way. I have a question. So the pikas don't hibernate in the winter, but do we know how active they are in the winter? Are they moving around a bit? Are they like kind of chilling and not moving? What are they doing?
I am so glad you asked that because I've been trying to come up with a good reason to go backcountry skiing at my field site for science for quite a long time. Yeah, we still really don't know like what they're doing during the winter because they don't tend to come to the surface very often. And actually, pikas are present under the like at a lot of ski resorts, like under the snow.
Mhm.
And that snow gets really, really compacted when there are a lot of people skiing on it. And they're under there, and then you go back in the summer and then they're there and you've been skiing on them all winter. The place that I'm most familiar with is like at Alta. All of these big bowls at Alta, there are pikas under there and you ski over them. So I don't really know what it is that they're doing under there. My best guess is that they spend a lot of time resting, not spending too much energy, and then just eating the food that they have. And I don't think that it probably costs them that much energy. They probably spend a lot of time sleeping, even though they're not really hibernating, just because it's relatively warm, right? It still is about 32 degrees underneath all that snow once you get a big thick layer of snowpack. But I would be really interested to put cameras under there and like spy on them for the winter. And then I would design that study so that I had to go pick up those cameras by skiing.
Well, I think you would have a lot of eager volunteers here that could help with that. But yeah, that's so interesting. I've definitely seen them at places like Alta under the high traverse where there's a lot of people skiing there
Yep.
in the winter. So that's really cool. Another question is, what is your favorite thing about pikas, and what surprises you most about pikas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that my favorite thing about them is that they are adorable and they live in beautiful places. And so this has really enabled a really enjoyable career for me to get to spend a lot of time, hiking and backpacking and interacting with these amazing animals. I think one of the things that surprises me most about them is that they, in spite of having a sort of a national reputation for being these really sensitive animals that are dying off in response to climate change, like a lot of at an individual level, like they're really plucky, like they're really they've got a lot of grit, right? They're like survivors. And I think that the example of that Pika WYWR, who was at least 7 years old last summer, when we saw her last, is a really great example. And I like to think about like how much the world has changed since she was born in at least 2017, because she was an adult when we trapped her in 2018. And so, think about like where you were in 2017 and like what life was like on a grand scale in 2017. And I think that that's just, her life spanned a tremendous amount of change. And I think that that is something that's sort of surprising, but also really awesome about pikas.
Yeah, they're resilient little guys.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another question from Jody. It's a wonderful lecture. Do you know where the closest monitored population is to Park City?
Yeah, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say I'm very unfamiliar with the Park City side of the Wasatch Mountains, but I'm sure that they are up there because I have been, I have seen pikas and have done some observations like up at Guardsman Pass, and at up Grizzly Gulch from Alta, and in at Catherine's Pass, as well. So I know that they're up there, like up at the ridge lines above Park City. You guys from there are also quite close to going to the Uintas, and the Uintas are interesting because the pikas that we find in the Wasatch are genetically most closely related to the Great Basin population. But the pika, as soon as you go over to the Uinta Mountains, the Uintas actually host a genetically unique subspecies of pikas, and you'll hear that they sound different. So if you go hike up to the ridgeline at Park City, and listen to the pikas there, and then go to the Uinta Mountains, the Uinta pikas, the Park City pikas will sound a little bit more like normal, and the Uinta pikas sound like like they sound kind of sad. The first time I heard one, I was like, oh my gosh, like that pika is not okay, but that's just what they sound like. They just have a different dialect. So along the Mirror Lake Highway, you start seeing them at the elevation of about like the Duchesne Tunnel and Cobble Rest campgrounds. As you're going from Camas up to up to Mirror Lake or to Bald Mountain Pass. And then of course they're all over up above on like the trail to Bald Mountain.
Awesome. Yeah, they do sound a little sad there, don't they?
Oh.
It is very like creaky. Eric has a question. Do pikas find lower elevations habitable? Are they adapting? They've seen or heard them at lower elevations in the Cascade Mountains in Oregon.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked it, because that was actually my PhD research, was looking at pikas living in the Columbia River Gorge and Mount Hood in Oregon. And the Columbia River Gorge is actually literally the lowest elevation where we find that this species, the American pika. They're found as low as nearly 150 meters above sea level, so like basically sea level. And in a habitat where you have warm summers and almost no snowpack, to protect them against really cold environments. And what we found in that research, that was a big question when I started my PhD research, is like, people were like, pikas are here in the Columbia River Gorge, but we don't really know what they're doing. We don't know how they're able to survive in this habitat. And what we found, we were interested in asking, like, is this an example of local adaptation where you have special pikas, or is it an example of a special habitat? And what we found is actually that at least in that population, it seems to be more of a special habitat. The rock slides there are actually covered in a thick layer of moss, and the moss it acts basically kind of like a swamp cooler. So it helps to keep the temperatures that the pikas experience in the rock slide cool and relatively stable. It also acts as a food source. So the pikas there are actually able to eat the moss. And so it's basically like living in a hay pile that keeps you cool during the summer and didn't require any energy to construct because there's just a lot of vegetation right there in the talus. So in response to your question, I think that some people have found some genetic signature of adaptation to warmer temperatures. We're seeing definitely a lot of behavioral adaptation. And there's a big question about like, to what degree can they mitigate this situation with behavioral adaptation versus that they need, that it's just too much for what them to accommodate like behaviorally. But there are definitely a lot of low elevation populations, and we're learning a lot by studying those low elevation populations. I would sort of lump Craters of the Moon in with that as well.
Cool. All right, maybe one more question from Nora. Do pikas just live in their den or tunnels, and where or when are their babies born?
Yeah, so they don't, we wouldn't call it probably a den or a tunnel, but they live in the space between the boulders in their habitat. So these rock slides and boulder fields, that they basically like create spaces, in between the rocks, and the pikas live in those spaces, basically as deep as the rock slide goes. And then they'll come up to the surface to, interact with each other and of course to go forage for food. The babies typically are born right around the time of snow melt. And so what happens is that they will actually mate when they're still under the snow. And they typically time the babies to be born right around the time that the snow melts and that there's fresh green vegetation that's growing for mom. So that while mom is providing milk for the babies, she has a lot of food to eat because that's very, very energetically expensive. But then what happens is very interesting because they're typically born, around like May or June, kind of depends on the habitat. But by the middle of August, they basically get kicked out of their territory. So mom will tolerate them in her territory until about, middle of August. And then at that point, she just like turns on them and she says, that's it. You're over, we're done. And you got to go out and find your own job and move into your own house. So I've actually seen a pika, an adult female pika, grab a baby pika. I was assuming it was her baby. Maybe it was somebody else's baby, but she grabbed it by the scruff of the neck and like threw it off of a rock.
Oh my God.
With her head. And it like, squeaked and ran away. And so anyway, we can all be grateful that we are not baby pikas who get kicked out at, basically age 13 and told to go live their own lives and find your own house.
Ooh. Yeah, rough. But man, baby pika must be extra cute.
Oh yes, the only thing cuter than a pika is a baby pika. They're about the size of like a little red potato.
Oh, adorable. Well, I have one last question, and that is, how can people stay up to date on yours and your students' work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I try to share that on social media. So I had my social media handles out there, but it's Dr. Pika Jo, DoctorPikajo. And I will try to share publications as they come out there. You can also Google, just look for pikas in the news. We do try to, when we have like new studies that come out with kind of interesting findings, I do try to like get some news coverage so that my students get some recognition and people can learn about this stuff. So I guess the internet.
Awesome. Yeah. Classic. A good spot. And I'm sure I've downloaded Pika Patrol app already. I'm sure everyone listening will share that in the follow-up. I just want to, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise. This has been so cool learning about pikas. I love seeing them in the mountains in Utah and Intermountain West. And I know a lot of our members and listeners do too. Thank you so much, Sherilyn, as well, for your ASL interpretation. And Yeah, thank you so much for your time this evening and everyone for attending. Your awesome questions. Those are great questions. Love a good Q&A. So thank you all so much for coming. We'll send a follow-up email with a lot of the links and a recording and ways to follow and stay up to date. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Varner. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for coming to hear about pikas.
Cool. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your night, and we'll see you at the next walks, talks, and workshop, or out on the rock slide looking for pikas this summer.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you guys. Bye.